Hello and welcome to Breaking the Cycle. My name is Alan Hyde, and tonight I am joined by a special guest, Jessica Seidel. How are you doing?
I'm doing good.
Good. Jessica is a MS, Master's in Science, LPC, so Licensed Professional Counselor, I believe is the designation. She's also the director over at it's Lead Ladder.
The Ladder Alliance.
The Ladder Alliance, that's right. And she also has a private practice telehealth called Mind Squared. And we're going to get into all these things as well as your background with trauma-informed care, working with kids, families, individuals. And you were telling me a little bit about it before, but we're gonna get into all of it as we go. And so as we start, why don't we just start with kind of what was your motivation, your passion for getting into the field of psychology?
Yeah, so that's always kind of the long-winded part of the story, right? So I am a survivor of child sexual abuse. And it was one of those things when I got into, it's happened in right before middle school, and by the time I got to high school, it was kind of like trying to understand the behaviors of other people. And so I took a psych class in high school, loved it so much I actually came back and was like the teacher assistant my senior year for that class.
Okay. That's how it started, huh?
Yeah, that was kind of how it started. And so then I went to UT Arlington and got my bachelor's in psychology from them, and took my precious time doing that, and then went and got my master's in counseling and development from Texas Women's University and finished my master's in a year and a half.
Yeah.
So.
Texas Women's University. What city is that in again?
That's in Denton.
Denton.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Competition to. Oh Lord, now I feel bad.
You don't even remember your guys' rival?
Uh-huh.
That's the way it goes. That's a good thing.
Mean Green. I was like, I can't think of the name of the school all of a sudden. I'm going to get a hard time for that because I've got friends that went there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, my sister has a lot of friends that went to Texas Women's.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so you had mentioned before you're pursuing your doctorate as well.
I am. So it's been kind of an interesting journey. It started, I'd say, probably in my undergrad where I deep dive into trauma, and then understanding how trauma affects the brain. I was kind of curious in what it looks like to try and learn when you've experienced trauma, because the brain just doesn't function the same. And so through all of my experience and working with kiddos and trying to better understand what we can do for individuals in general, so that they can learn more effectively, it's led me into the school psychology realm.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I'm currently at Texas Women's working on a doctorate in school psych. We actually just finished out the semester, so.
Awesome. Yeah, it's probably a relief, huh?
It really is. It's it's not hard. It's just a lot of work.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. My fun tidbit, and then we'll jump right back in. My sister is a school psychologist.
Oh, very
so
nice.
she was commenting. She was the one who was commenting, like, go school psychs. Yeah.
Very nice. Very nice.
Yeah.
University of North Texas. There we go. UNT.
Oh, okay.
Now I remember it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
See, I told you I would.
As you're studying in your doctorate, are you at your dissertation candidacy, or are you just studying currently?
Yeah, I'm just studying. Like, this was first year, second semester. Like, we are baby school psychologists at this point.
Okay. Well, you'll be there,
Yes.
It's just a process.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
A long one sometimes.
Do you feel like when you do that dissertation, the bulk of your work is going to be around like brain health and how these things are impacted within the realm of trauma, and then go work with kids and get them those resources? Yeah.
So kind of the thing that I'm playing around with right now. So ADHD, obviously we've seen a lot of that. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And what many probably don't know is there is not a single assessment to diagnose that. In recent years, we have found that it has a genetic component to it. So usually somebody in the family has it. But what is kind of the tricky thing is that individuals of trauma can also have signs of ADHD because of the way it affects the brain. It affects it very similarly. And so I think my dissertation is probably going to revolve around like some type of differential diagnosis and trying to understand the differences in those.
Yeah.
And what that looks like and how we can more effectively treat it in the school system. So
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I was just talking with clients of mine today. He was going in for an assessment, and he was hoping that he'd be able to assess through for ADHD. And I told him, I said, hey, let's pump the brakes a little bit, because let me educate you on kind of what they're going to do, because there's not full assessments for ADHD, but they may be able to tell certain symptomology, and they're going to do a full assessment, a full psychological assessment on you, right? And I also like that you pointed out the differentiation between ADHD and possible diagnosis of trauma, PTSD, and things of that nature. And for those listening, I know we've talked about this on the show before with Gabe, is, there's an overdiagnosis culture.
Yes.
And I think media plays a factor, social media. But what are your thoughts on?
Diagnoses are great for individuals who are really struggling, because I think it gives you an answer of like, okay, I'm not crazy, right? I do have something going on. I am struggling with something. But it can also be this kind of hang up too, that we're not being all about our diagnosis either. Yeah. And so making sure that it's utilized effectively. I mean, that was hammered into us in my undergrad in psychology, was like, be aware of your diagnosis. Don't just hand out a diagnosis, really be with the client, understand what's going on, because this is something that's going to track with them the rest of their lives. And if you misdiagnose, we've heard the stories of it, right? Mm-hmm. It affects somebody's life deeply. And so,
in your career, have you ever had someone come to you with the wrong diagnosis and then help them see the path towards what would probably better be a description?
Yes. I did groups when I was doing kind of not my undergrad, but my graduate work and my LPC internship stuff. And it was groups for kids with ADHD. And so, you come in and they're like, they've got ADHD, they're on medication, but it doesn't seem to be making a difference. And so, they ask questions of like, is it in the family? What's been going on? Yeah. Doing an ACE assessment, for those of you who don't know, that stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, done by Kaiser Permanente back in '97. And it's a measure of trauma, essentially.
Isn't it? It's no wonder that that's blown up, right? Because people are seeing the effects. Like, I don't know what generation you're in, but the millennial generation that was overdiagnosed with ADHD, and now it's like there's all kinds of other complicated issues. Maybe we missed the diagnosis window here, or something was misdiagnosed.
Right. And then, you throw autism into it as a neurodevelopment, and it gets real messy real quick. Yeah. We could probably have a whole follow-up conversation, but what are your thoughts on the surgence of autism diagnosis in today's culture? I think it's been something we've always had. And it's one of those, as we become more knowledgeable in it, as we have more effective assessments for it, because it is one of those that has assessments, you're better able to understand it. The kind of joke in the mental health world is we all have a little autism. And that's why it's beautiful that it's on a spectrum. Like some of us have it, we're a little socially awkward, but we function on a day-to-day, whereas there are individuals who truly, it's a neurodevelopment disorder. It's how it affects the brain and how the brain learns and how people learn. And so, it's important when it needs to be diagnosed. Yeah.
It's also good that we can joke about it too.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of the Amen clinics?
I have not.
In California, they started in California, and now they're national. And Dr. Daniel Amen, he does like brain scans on the Pope and a bunch of famous people.
Yes. Yeah. I was like, he has got a book, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's got. Yeah,
that's where
that guy. He's a pro. He's as much a psychiatrist as he is a businessman.
Yes.
So he's got like 20 books, but his famous one is Change Your Brain, Change Your Life, or he's got one on ADHD too that's like really, really popular. But he was really big on like not overdiagnosing these things, but making sure that people aren't over medicated and are on natural remedies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I'm sure most people have read about how, our diets and our food affect behavior in kiddos. And so, especially those with ADHD, and sometimes you can kind of manage some of those behaviors by just kind of changing the diet. So, especially for parents who are concerned about sticking kids on stimulants and other medications. Yeah.
And you work with kids currently, right?
Not currently. Okay. I have in the past. It's a little hard to do telehealth with like 5 and 6 year olds.
That's a fair point. Yeah, touche.
Especially when play therapy is really the most effective, because language skills just aren't there yet for describing what you're feeling.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, because I get a lot of questions. I work with adults, and I always have in my career, except for my internship when I worked at a continuation school. But my population is adults, and so they always have questions about their kids.
Yes.
And I know some of them are listening to this podcast. And so what would you say when a parent is kind of reaching out and saying, hey, my kid is starting to have some problems. What might I do? What would be the best route to get them some support? I know it's generic, right? Because you and I know it can get real deep real quick.
Oh, yeah.
What would be kind of your first recommendations?
I mean, for me, depending on kind of what you're experiencing, right? And so if you're having behavioral issues, a lot of it's going to be that ABC method, like the antecedent, the behavior, the consequence. Like, where's the kid developmentally, right? Are we at a point where we're pushing boundaries, we're trying new things, we're going to say no to mom and dad? And it's like, okay, so then are mom and dad setting effective boundaries, right? Setting effective consequences for those behaviors. Looking at kind of just basic things is usually where I start. And then as we try those things and you're all like, well, I've tried this, I've tried that. The thing you have to understand most is that for adults, it takes about 28 days for a new habit, right?
Yeah.
For kids, you're talking like 6 weeks. Then you're going to see growth and then regression. And if you are trying something new and you have a baby, you move, you lose your job, something major or drastic happens, you're going to see a regression in that behavior happen. And so when you're working with your children and you're trying to make change, I'd say the biggest thing is being patient, and understanding that they're not little adults.
Right.
And they're going to need lots of repetition.
Yeah.
In whatever you're trying to do.
That's a big one. And it's like, go figure, you have a conversation with a therapist, they start saying the right things, and this is a big one, I think, for those who are listening, who are looking for support on this. Our kids, the children in our communities, are not little adults. I loved that.
Yeah.
I thought that I think that's so important to hammer home.
Yeah, I mean, because my daughter's 6, and she says some things sometimes that you're all like, all right, like you get things, like you have this whole opinion and but at the same time, like, she's 6. Yeah. She hasn't taken all the advanced courses I have. She doesn't deal with the day-to-day stressors that I deal with. She has some social drama, don't get me wrong, but she doesn't know how to navigate most of that yet. Yeah. And so, when she's having the meltdown because, Susie doesn't want to be her best friend for the 3rd time this week, like, be patient, be understanding, help her understand that, it's okay to feel sad. I love to tell parents, like, we accept all emotions, just not all behaviors.
Yeah.
It's okay to be angry, but it's not okay to slam the door.
Right. Yeah. It's a good point. We accept all emotions, but not all behaviors. I think, a lot of times we, as adults, we get so wrapped up in our emotional experience, overthinking that emotional experience. And, I'm sure if we polled the average person, they're not going to put it into even emotional terms.
No.
And so, drawing that distinction so simply, I think will be really helpful for people.
Yes. The average person does not have the language or the emotional vocabulary they need to express themselves. Not to mention the generation of us who were told, like, suck it up, pull it up by your bootstraps.
Right.
We don't talk about that.
Yeah.
And so we haven't really learned how to effectively express ourselves in many situations.
Do you think that landscape is, like, genuinely changing?
Yeah, with the Zennial, millennial generation, you're definitely seeing a shift. Even in your millennial parents and the way that they parent, like, the questions I get are different than when, even 10 years ago I started doing parent education. It's just the way we're trying to handle emotions, the way we're trying to parent is very different. And I think it's because of how we were parented. I talk to people like, you parent, your parents parented, your grandparents parented as best as they knew how.
Yeah.
Unless they wanted to do it differently. And that's what you're seeing is people who are like, I wasn't wild about that. I think I'm going to do it differently.
Yeah. Yeah. Zennials, is that what we're calling?
Yeah. That's for those of you who don't know, that's that older millennial that doesn't really identify.
Oh, okay.
They feel more in line with, like, the Gen X generation, because they still were, like, maybe had boomer parents, later stage.
Gotcha.
Latchkey kids.
I learned something new every day. I did not know this term. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
And it's probably your individuals between the ages of, like, 35 to 40-ish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Kind of like that 85 and above.
Yeah. In your practice, is that kind of typically what you're working with these days, adults ranging in like early to late adulthood?
Yeah, so I always say like the niche that found me, because I'm not seeking these individuals, is I work a lot with females, typically in their mid to late 20s, struggling with anxiety, parenting issues, ADHD, bipolar disorder, OCD, and then like the issues of being a woman in the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Most of the
So
time.
our demographic, when we look at it, it's mostly female listeners. So ladies, if you're watching this, and we're going to plug this a little bit later and we'll get into talking about this, but Jessica also does work with Plaid women. Is that how we?
Yeah, Plaid for women.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll have that plugged, but her articles that I'm going to pull up here in a little bit and we'll talk about are wonderful. And I think she really does have a grasp on just kind of what the female experience is. If I could say that as a man from my perspective, it's like I was reading them, I was like, oh, this is good stuff.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
Well, it's, they're growing up, we didn't really talk about, one, what it's like to be a woman, but one, what it's like to be a woman and have kids and now be in a space where women kind of have to work. It's not, many women get to stay home and that's fantastic. But that's also really hard. It's got its own job. And I don't think we talk about enough on the dynamics of how hard it is to stay at home, but also how hard it is to work and how hard it is just to balance life in general as a female because of all of the societal expectations that's put on from us from a very young age.
What do you think the shift is early? And I think a wonderful transition to maybe take a look at this is like, what do you think the transition is early for some of these girls that are growing up in societies and cultures today where that message that you heard growing up might still be perpetuated?
So with my daughter, I'm kind of open and honest about it. We talk about it. I'm like, oh, mommy's frustrated. I'm like, it's hard raising two kids. It's hard work. And so she'll kind of mimic that. And she was like, today was a hard day, wasn't it? And I was like, yeah, it kind of was. And that's okay. We got through it. And just kind of helping her understand that like, not everything's going to be perfect. It's not Susie Homemaker. It's not keeping with the Joneses. Like life's hard, but we keep going through it. Like we can persevere forward, so to speak. Yeah. And then, letting her feel comfortable to express herself and have her opinion and try things that, aren't maybe gender specific type of situation. Let her go play in the mud and get dirty and, she wants to race cars and pick up worms or, at one point she wanted to be as she said, she was like 3. She's like, I want to be a biologist. I was like, what's a biologist? She's like, the people that study plants. And I was like, a biologist? She goes, yeah, that one. Yeah. Nice. And then we wanted to be a hairstylist. And now we want to be, I think it's a ballerina. I don't know. We're really into Monster High right now. Like that's a thing, which for those of you that don't know, Monster High is a thing. It's great. I like it. It talks about diversity and stuff like that. But
it's like a TV show, right?
I think it's it started out as a cartoon, and then Disney's grabbed it. Or no, is it Disney or Paramount? Don't hold me to that one, folks. But they now have 2 movies out. Oh, okay. Yes, and they're, as my daughter calls, live action version. So they're like real people in the movie. Oh, okay. Because it's not animated, like it's live action.
Interesting. I've heard of this Monster High. I've just never. Yes. I'm probably not the demographic. 30 something bearded man. Probably not.
No, not really. Not what they're looking for there. And so it's what she's gravitated towards. It's. I don't know, it's different.
Yeah, and I think you've put some of these things really simply, and I like that because there's a lot of convoluted information when it comes down to basic stuff. It's like, when I think of my little sister, right, she is smarter, better educated, in her domains was a better athlete. It's like she also played in the mud and would play with the boys growing up. We didn't exclude her from anything. She's 5 years younger, and then somewhere, I think in the last 10 to 15 years, it started to get political in the landscapes around these discussions that are really just straightforward stuff where when you have a brother or a sister, the lines are blurred. You can identify with whatever you want to do, and you're going to be better than each other at certain things, and that's just the way it is.
Amen. Yes. Yeah. I'm the oldest of 5 and the only girl. So I have 4 younger brothers. And being the oldest, you know, there's always certain privileges, right? Like you get to stay up later, you get to do all the fun things.
Sure.
But I'll never forget, we hit high school and I was like, hey, you know, I'm going to go hang out with some friends. And my dad was like, well, you have to be home at 10. I was like, what time does John have to be home? Well, midnight. Why do I have to be home at 10 and he gets to be home at midnight? Like, I'll be home when John's home.
Yeah.
So, you know, just kind of being aware of not creating those double standards, you know, equal is not fair, that kind of thing.
Yeah, you know, what is it?
Or fair is not equal. Sorry, let me backtrack that.
Yeah, I try not to take too hard of a stance on these kind of things. And Gabe and I have had some difficult conversations where we just hash some stuff out and solve from different perspectives. And, you know, it's like on the equality thing, it's like, you know, it doesn't need to be complicated.
No.
And when it does become complicated is the political realms.
Oh, yeah.
When people, you know, put the front-facing camera and get irritated about it versus just having a conversation like you're having, education from your perspective. And thankfully, we live in a day and age where we can just listen and hear each other. And that, Gabe, right, your perspective on this as well, I don't want to speak for you, is just being heard, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's simply just that. It's being able to listen while also, like, taking in the information. I think a lot of times, like, people will hear you but not really taking it in.
Yeah.
And so in order to really gauge somebody's perspective, you have to really digest the words that they're saying. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's my take on it.
Yeah. Well said.
I appreciate it.
If there was one, I'm going to put you on the spot with this one. If there was one thing in the field of psychology that if you couldn't do anything else, this is where you would put all your focus.
Ooh, that's tricky, because I have like the guilty pleasure of studying. I don't know. I don't know what you really want to call it. But serial killers is kind of like a small fascination of mine.
Interesting.
And looking at understanding the psychopathy, but also looking at the childhood trauma that they all experience.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think childhood trauma is kind of where I will forever live. It's multifaceted. That's kind of the biggest thing about it is it doesn't present the same way in every person. You know, you can have somebody with an ACE score of 6 who's perfectly normal, whatever that is, functioning in society. How about that?
Yeah.
And then, you know, you have the one that turns out to be a serial killer, and it's just.
Yeah, especially with you never know who the sociopath is, and that's the dangerous part. Is like you don't know until after, and then it's just they snap, and you can feel it in the room with them. I was telling Gabe years ago I'd worked with a gentleman who had murdered 3 people, and he clearly, like, we were under observation with him because we were doing some assessments back then when I worked at a treatment hospital, and you could just feel it when you walked in the room. I was explaining, like, you know, with different personality disorders, you know, narcissism is really fast, borderline's really fast. You know, the rest of us maybe who have, like, you know, just normal personality traits and features, we're kind of going speed limit. And then somewhere over here off to the right is a sociopath just kind of inching along in a very creepy way. And they assimilate so well because they move so slow. I think that's the scary thing about it too.
Yeah, they're definitely able to adapt to all behaviors. The biggest part is that lack of empathy that they possess. And so they can be the most charming, amazing person in the world. They just, if they're not getting anything out of it, like, they really don't care.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
And you mentioned a good point too, is, you know, childhood trauma. It's the number one thing. You know, I work mostly with 12-steppers, so like friends and family members of alcoholics, addicts of any nature, creed, you know, just every background. Right. And that is always an aspect. We're always looking at their ACEs. We're always looking at their adverse childhood experiences. And so you're stating, and I agree with you, it's like if you're coming in the realm of therapy to work through something that's bringing you distress, it's probably pretty fruitful to look for history of trauma.
Yeah. I'm not saying like all things stem from your early childhood and your issues with your mother. Like you don't have to Freudian it, but it definitely, you know, our brain wires very young, right? Like we have 90% of our neurons by age 3. Okay. And then all the pruning happens in your teens as your brain starts to take shape and decide what's keeping, what it's throwing away. And so if you're not looking at that, you're missing a very significant piece of the brain development everybody's experienced in very key years. And so if you experience something during those years, that's that's what came out of this ACEs study, is that individuals who experience high ACE scores, it literally changes your genetics and it changes your brain matter. And so it changes the way you cope with things at a very early age. And so, like for, you know, addicts who start things in their teens, like it shapes how the brain copes with stuff. And so you have to kind of look at some of these things.
Yeah. And what are some of your just kind of go-tos when you're working with people when you start to notice that they need just straight up coping skills in whatever version of the work that you're in with them, whatever phase, knowing that this is just part of it? Mm-hmm. What are some of the like go-to coping skills that you really like as a clinician?
So I talk to all my clients about breathing, and anybody you have come in, they're like, oh, breathing. And I'm like, but it's legitimate. You know, when you are struggling, when you are, especially, you know, when we talk PTSD and that panic or anxiety starts to set in, you create your own biofeedback because shallow breathing starts, racing heart rate. And so if we can remember just to breathe, we can slow all that down and kind of take more control and feel less out of control in that moment. Grounding techniques are also one of my favorite things, recognizing the here and now, being present in the moment, which then brings you to mindfulness activities, to be more aware of yourself, because we kind of ignore ourselves a lot. And if you've experienced trauma and you've always had to maybe take care of a parent or take care of a sibling, we put ourselves on the back burner, and we're not it's like, oh yeah, my stomach hurts, but it's fine. It's like, stop, wait a minute. Let's backtrack that. Pain tells us something. So what's going on?
Yeah. We, my therapist always tells me, she says, you know, everybody has to feel. Mm-hmm. And when we run from it, and I'm a dude, so I got real good at running from my emotions. Yeah. And, but we're always going to act it out. You know, sometimes people do it in really productive ways. Sometimes people do it in really destructive ways. But either way, we're acting out the emotion.
Yes. And so it's important to be aware of yourself, because in that awareness, you can recognize the triggers that are setting you off, because that's kind of where those maladaptive coping mechanisms started, is that you kept getting triggered by something and you didn't like the way it felt. And so we're leaning on things that aren't helpful to deal with it. And so, you know, it's functional until it's not, right? That's kind of usually the DSM's diagnosis is like, it's dysfunctional in daily life.
Yeah. And, you know, and then the big one, which is, you know, is this causing you a clinical level of distress or not? And, you know, it could be causing some kind of distress, but if it's not that significant distress and you're coping with it just fine, then we look for other descriptors.
Exactly. So we were talking about like how childhood trauma kind of changes the genetic makeup and all of that. And, you know, Kaiser Permanente, the study they did was on people with HMOs, so 40, 50-year-old men and women, doing kind of a retrospective interview. And these ACEs tell us that, you know, it has true medical consequences in what we experience. And the research shows that, you know, individuals who have an ACE score of 4 or more are 12 times more likely to have an epigenetic marker. And so for those who don't know what epigenetic markers are.
For those who don't know.
Yeah, so an epigenetic marker is essentially like the on-off switch for your gene. So think of it as like a light switch, right? And so what happens is that for individuals who are, you know, predisposed to a genetic condition. So you're not going to have some random show up. I mean, it happens, but it's not as likely. But if you're predisposed to a genetic condition in your family, having an ACE score makes you at significantly increased risk of having this disorder. And so I'll never forget, I was teaching a parenting class, caring for the traumatized child. And I had a grandma who was taking care of her 2 grandchildren, who had been their mom had been taking care of them, but there were men in and out of the house. There were drugs involved, all of that. And she was saying, as I'm telling her this information, she goes, I may need to follow up with the doctor on her youngest grandchild, who was like 3. And I was like, really, why? And she was like, well, there's a kidney condition in the family. And he, was starting to show signs, but he's 3. And like the signs, I guess, don't usually come around to like they're 8 or 12 or older. And I was like, you might go back and talk to the doctor and really have a deeper discussion on what it, if it is this kidney disease that's causing the issue, to get treatment, potentially started earlier, because, I think whatever it was preventable, that kind of thing. Yeah. Of course, in the world of parent education, like they went on their way and I have no idea how that ended, but I hope for the best.
That's part of the tricky part of being a therapist is you impart the knowledge and the wisdom and you hope they do it. And unless you're doing long-term work, you don't really find out.
You don't always get the ending. Sometimes it's kind of like you terminate and they're good. And if you don't hear again, you're assuming things went well. Yeah.
I always point my clients to, who are friends and family members of alcoholics is we have research on the Al-Anon website. And one of the things that they started to find was precisely what you were talking about with like genetic markers of people dying of, just random illnesses, stress-related illnesses really later on in life. And then they started to make a connection to, the generational alcoholism.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and the stress and trauma that happens in the family that genetically wouldn't have been described any other way as to why this person developed this disease. And so there's a lot of different angles here. But I think moral of the story, too, is like if your child is struggling or suffering, getting an ACE assessment is probably a great idea.
Yeah. Nadine Burke is kind of the doctor that has taken this on in California. Yeah. And she has 2 books. The Deepest Well is her first one. I don't remember the name of her second one.
She did the TED Talk on ACEs too,
yes,
right?
Yes, she did. She talks about the bear in the woods.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's gone.
There it went.
There it went away. But yeah, I mean, she dives into how these medical conditions show up, and then doing this trauma-focused therapy with these children, those that were suddenly that were failing to thrive in some of these neighborhoods, make a huge turnaround. But also like when you start asking, and this is where that like generational thing comes in, where you start asking questions of all like, were your parents divorced? Has anybody ever been incarcerated? Did you ever feel safe in your home? People get weird about answering those questions still.
Yeah,
and
touchy.
So, trying to give an ACE, you don't always get all the answers. And that's where your, clinical interviews and things are going to come in, because eventually it comes out.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's interesting to always get the full picture sometimes.
Yeah, and I think if you're in the area listening to this, you're looking for a therapist who gets it, right? We're going to have Jessica plug her information in a bit, but this point you mentioned about the clinical interviews, it's like I work with predominantly grown men, and I work with them for long periods of time, because in the beginning I know that even if they're an accurate historian, that they're not telling me half of the picture.
No.
Yeah, and the puzzle pieces are all scattered around the house, and they don't want to take me in that room yet, Yeah,
well, and even sometimes I find with clients is that, your brain's job is to survive and to keep you sane. And when you experience a deep trauma, it will forget things. And individuals, that's kind of one of the hallmarks of individuals who've experienced trauma, is you kind of have gaps in your timeline. Like you can't quite remember things in the exact order. There's almost kind of like holes there. And so it's not abnormal for individuals to come in and not tell the whole story. Or, I mean, I've got clients even who they just struggle to want to say it because it makes it too real.
Yeah.
And so, it's in any therapeutic relationship or any therapy session, it's about the relationship. And I talk about this with people all the time, is that, if you don't trust your therapist, if you don't feel comfortable with your therapist, you're not going to have effective therapy. And so, it's okay if you don't connect with your therapist. Like, we're humans. We don't all like each other.
Right. Right.
And so, if you're with a therapist and it just doesn't seem to click and you're not willing to share things, then you know, it might be time to find a different therapist, and that's okay.
Yeah, and we'll make referrals.
Oh, 100%, yeah.
Yeah. What would you say, because when I was a young clinician and hard-headed and finding information like, ooh, I really like this, what would you say to a clinician who took a hard-nosed stance on no matter what the child is going through, it's the parents' accountability or responsibility? How would you, because I needed education on this. I had some really good clinicians that came into my life and shared wisdom with me to kind of soften that a little bit and also help me hold proper boundaries around that, because a lot of that is truth, but there are nuances. How would you impart that to either listeners or just like, and it doesn't have to be anything in depth. I know I'm putting you on the spot.
No, you're good. So children are humans, and they have their own thoughts, their own opinions, and their own choices. And so they're not robots. They're not gonna, you know, it's not about how they're being programmed by mom and dad. Believe it or not, sometimes they have their own thoughts of how they think things should go too. You know, your strong-willed children are the best example of this, as they're like your little lawyer negotiators, right? You're all like, okay, you can choose this and this. And they're like, well, what about this? And you're like, well, hell, I didn't think about that one.
Yeah.
And so then you've got to decide as a parent, like, am I sticking the line, or do I give to this compromising technique that my child's trying to use? And so, you know, understanding that, you know, psychology isn't just the brain. There's the biological, there's the psycho, there's the social. It's not just nature, it's not just nurture, it's a combination of both.
Right. And for the men listening, this is why I keep reasonable women around, because they're the ones who check this in my innate male nature, and in my early clinical life. I got the education from the perspective, you know, I played baseball for 19 years. So when I came into my master's, I was coming right off a baseball field. It was dudes 24/7. And I was a bull in a china shop. And, you know, getting that reasonable perspective from the other side of nurturing and taking our time with people and not needing results or outcomes, you know, I think you just encapsulated that really beautifully.
Well, yeah, and that outcomes piece I think is really important, especially for young clinicians, is that you're so driven to make a difference or have an answer or get people better, and that imposter syndrome, right, can start to really set in. And so checking yourself sometimes, even of like, am I being realistic about this situation?
When you were doing your 3,000 hours, or like maybe when you were in school, did they make you record any of your sessions?
Oh my gosh, yes. Oh, those are awful.
That's the worst.
Those were awful.
I swear, it's so good sometimes just to sit and talk with a clinician who understands like how uncomfortable that is.
It so is.
Oh, it's so cringe.
Yeah, like you're sitting here on you never forget your first like pre-prac clinical rotation where you're having to record it. And for us, it was like student on student. That way, you know, you're not damaging anybody. And you're like, well, I don't like, how do you start talking?
Yeah. What do I say? Can I move my hands? I had a professor once tell us to sit on our hands, not because we can't use them, just because we use them as crutches a lot. And, I still use my hands.
Oh, I'm incredibly I mean, you notice like I'm holding hands because I'm incredibly gesticular. I don't take the mic out here. But yeah, and ours was like, you know, therapy's not about asking questions, and so like you go like, no, can't ask that, and so like you're like, well, what do I say next?
Yeah. The masters. I went to Vanguard University. It's in Southern California, and they are very psychoanalytic, and so it's you don't break the silence. We really cut back on verbal crutches, like, you know, when you hear me say and when you record it and you hear yourself like while they're sharing something, and then you get asked, what clinical intervention, what was the purpose? It's like, oh my God. And then they tell you afterwards, they're like, you know, we were really just holding a stringent standard, but go be you. Yeah. And, it's
and then you're like, well, now I don't know who I am. Okay, cool. I figure this out again.
I want to make sure that we have just a few moments, because I want to spotlight. So Jessica does some writing. I'm going to pull this up on the iPad here for Plaid for Women. And I was rereading through some of them just to be fresh before I came in. Managing overwhelm is at the top. And when I repost some of this to Facebook, I'll share your link so that people can go and enjoy your writing the way that I was enjoying this here. But one that caught my eye right away, all right, was Home for the Holidays. And, we're nowhere near the holidays, but what do you think are some of the important takeaways for people listening when it comes to navigating relationships with your family around the holidays, or just in general when you got someone difficult that lives down the street?
Yeah. Family. Gotta love them, right? So this is where boundaries are your biggest friend, because it's going to set a line of where people don't cross. And if you set that expectation up front, it's what you can go back to when somebody crosses that line. And then the hardest part for most people, especially family, is then what is the consequence for that boundary once it's been crossed too many times? And understanding that, even if you still have to go to the Christmas or Thanksgiving dinner with Uncle Ted, who you're not speaking to outside of Christmas or Thanksgiving dinner, is that sorry, brain just like completely went blank. I love it when it does that.
Yeah, it happens to me all the time too.
Is kind of like the way you handle the people you don't like working with. You're nice, you're courteous, but you don't let them go where you don't want them to be. And I actually have a client I'm working with who she was telling sharing a story. And so it's become my new phrase, but it's like, not today.
Yeah.
Just not today, not today, Ted. We're not doing that today.
Yeah. It's the simple stuff that are the effective boundaries that I always remind people when they come in. It's like, you're the expert of your life, and we're here to help you shine the light on it so that you can see it. And when you do see it, you'll see the simplicity of what needs to be said, and then you go practice it, and you're gonna mess it up.
Oh, 100%.
Right? But I really liked, the concept of natural consequences. Yes. And this is really important in boundaries too, guys, is, when you've stated, this is how I'm going to behave, that's the best way for someone to understand you mean business, right? Because, this line here on the table, if you were just to say like, hey, I've set a line here on the table, I don't know where that line is until you've told me I'm only going up to that line. And if I cross over that, I'm just not going to do it, right? And so now I start to see what you're willing to do, what you're not willing to do. And I can either adhere to it or not. And that's the beauty, is if I don't, you've already told me what's going to happen.
Exactly.
You're peacing out.
Yes. And I think sometimes we get into women especially, and I'll talk from the women's perspective. I'll let you talk on the male's perspective, but we often believe that everybody can mind read. You know what I'm thinking, right? And so that goes with family too. Like, family does not always know what it is you're wanting. And so having to verbally, written, whatever, be like, listen, we are not X, Y, and Z, or I am not X, Y, and Z, or you cannot X, Y, and Z, is the most important part of setting that boundary. Because if, just like kids, when you set the expectation, they will rise. Same with your family. Set the expectation. See if they'll rise to the expectation. And then when they don't, again, that's where those consequences come in, is like, well, if you do this, then this is going to happen. Yeah.
Sufficient challenge, right? And, with kids, they always say the sufficient challenge is age appropriate. All right. And with adults, it's, we don't really have to worry so much anymore about it being age appropriate as much as it being just appropriate.
Yes.
Yeah. Like, it's not vindictive. If anything, sometimes it can be confrontational, but out of compassion.
Yeah. I was like, confrontation doesn't have to be a bad thing.
Yeah. Sometimes it can be necessary. And, working with alcoholics, I'm sure you and the family members of alcoholics, a lot of times confrontation and boundaries is necessary because it's going to be tested or pushed. And the person I'm working with is allowing that because they get something out of it too, because then they get to act out. That's a whole nother can of worms.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Is there anything else you'd add on the Home for the Holidays that, I know I didn't ask you nearly everything that was in here, but that, you like about that, or just kind of what prompted you to do that post?
Yeah, so it was one of the first posts I did. I think it was a submission in November. And, I was kind of asking people, like, when you think about the holidays, what is the thing that stresses you out the most? And they're like, oh my God, going to deal with family. And I kind of reflected on like what my own experience has been with family, and it changes too, right? So when you're in your 20s, dealing with your family is very different kinds of boundaries as to when you're in your 30s, or when you have kids, or when you're older, or, if you're in the LGBT community, like we all have very different things that we're dealing with. And I know, like, for my family, having kids, being somebody in the child abuse prevention world, we don't hit, we don't spank. And I come from the South, Southern Baptist family, boomers, like spanking is expected. And so having that conversation of, acting out, we're going to set consequences, but we don't spank. And, if I'm not going to be open to that as a suggestion, nor am I going to allow you to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I hammer home with my clients the difference between punishment and discipline.
Discipline, right? Yeah.
Discipline, the definition of it is learning a new, a new idea, a new skill, right? So there are consequences, and without those consequences, you're not going to learn that new skill. I mean, we're therapists. We know it's like there were a lot of consequences and sacrifices and risks, like any other profession. But without those, we wouldn't be working at the level that we're working with clients who come to see us every day.
Right.
Yeah.
No.
Now, it's sideways. I swear this iPad is so old I can't get it to flip anymore. But gosh, you've got like 4 or 5 here, just the ones I'm looking at, and I want to ask you about all of them, but I want to be cognizant of the time because they were great. Finding a play mindset. Let's go with that one.
Yes.
Yeah, because the other ones they're serious ones, and they have really great nuggets, and we're going to share so you guys can read. But this one I'm a goofy guy. I'm a silly goose. When I saw this one, I was like, I gotta read this one. So tell us about your post on the play mindset, and just give us a tidbit of what goes on in that post.
Yeah, and I don't quite remember what the prompt was, but I'm a play therapist. I work with kids, plays, all that we do. And there's actually research out there that talks about just playing for like 15 minutes can reduce your stress levels by like 50% or something like that. Like, it's ridiculous. But as adults, what is the one thing we don't do? Play, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's because we see it as childish. But play doesn't have to be like hanging out on the jungle gym, swinging from the monkey bars. Because let's face it, as you get closer to 40, that is not a fun thing to do.
No, it's not as easy as it once was.
No, it isn't. And for some of us, we might be too tall for it at this point. And so finding the things that bring you joy, right, that you enjoy doing, and making time for them. Because we often push these things off because we see them as not important or, not productive. And honestly, the best thing you can do for yourself is have unproductive time. In whatever it may be. And I think the article kind of goes into, like for some of you, like fishing can be playing, doing shopping or styling designs can be playing. It's kind of, I almost think of it as like, it's the stuff that really engages the right side of your brain, where you're getting to enjoy, relax, and enjoy a part of yourself that you don't usually spend time with.
Yeah, I like that. I being from California, I'm sure you can imagine, I have a healthy number of in the entertainment industry, like actors and work in talent agencies. You would think these creatives would be like the most fun people. I swear, I have to remind them, like, hey, do something fun for yourself this week. Find a hobby, something you don't have to be good at. That's, I think, the big challenge. Yes, you don't have to be good at it. No. A lot of people want to be good at the things they're going and engaging in their hobbies and play and stuff, and it's like, just go make a mess. Yeah,
go be good at being bad at something. Like, have fun with it.
So we're coming close to the end here, a couple minutes left. I want to ask you a few rapid fire questions and just kind of have a little fun with it and see what you think. But if you had a mental health theme park, what would be the first ride that you built?
Mental health theme park?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I don't know. Like the anxiety drop.
The anxiety drop. How long are they dropping?
Exactly. You're all like, it's the anxiety drop. We're going to pull you up, and then you're just never going to know, and we're going to drop you.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, they technically kind of have that ride. I think it's the Batman ride or something along those lines. But
yeah, they call it Lex Luthor's Drop of Doom in California.
Okay, yeah, there you go. And it's all like, we're going to bring you all the way up and then drop you. And I was like, if there's not a better example of anxiety, I don't know what is.
Yeah. Well, what if they put you up there and say, okay, see you in 3 days?
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If well, let's go with this one. Your favorite cartoon character from childhood would be who?
Gotta remember what I watched in childhood. I think the only thing coming to mind is Bugs Bunny, and I'm like, I know it's not Bugs Bunny.
Yeah. Do you want to take another stab?
How about Kim Possible?
Kim Possible. My mom my mom's name is Kim. She loved Kim Possible. I see Gabe laughing. She used to have the little keychain that like sang this theme song. Like, Mom, put it away. Come on.
Yes. Because I mean, I don't know, female, kicking butt, like taking names. I don't know. It's all the strong things I've always wanted to be.
How would Kim Possible benefit from seeing you for therapy?
I would say managing her own expectations.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, way to tie your points in here too on that.
Yes.
So let's take a moment, plug your the place that you work with, the Mind Squared, anything that you have going on, where people can find you, and then we'll also give the links when we put videos out. But plug it all.
Yeah. So I am a owner and therapist at Mind Squared Counseling. We are a telehealth practice here in the state of Texas, so I can see anybody in the state of Texas. And because it's telehealth, I can see you wherever you are in the state of Texas, as the ginormous state that we're in. So as you've heard tonight, I work a lot with PTSD, specifically childhood trauma, though I have worked with a few veterans, though it's a very different realm of PTSD. And then anxiety, ADHD, parenting issues, mom, postpartum stuff, because that's hard stuff. And I'm here to kind of support you in any way that I can. I've got lots of resources, and then I'm working on all kinds of new things as they come up.
Yeah.
So,
And if you're open to it, we'll have Jessica back on at some point in the future to update us. Right. But in the meantime, we'll have the links for her stuff wherever you find our videos, whether it's Spotify, YouTube, Facebook. We'll get those links out so you can get in touch with Jessica if you felt like you liked what she was saying and want to work with her. In the meantime, we recover together, we break the cycle together, and we're blessed to have you here. So, Jessica, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Awesome.
Yeah. Cool.
Hey, this is Phoenix, host of After Dark with Phoenix, broadcasting live